separated. Um, there were I know this is it's like supposed to be Peru, but it was so Mississippi for me. I'm sorry. Like I'm not sorry. I just couldn't help it. I mean, it's like there were moments that I could hear and feel a black church. Like I could the call and response, this sort of all the every bit of emotion is layered in with this. I mean, just there's so much depth, there's so much history, there's so much culture that if I didn't know that you wrote it, I would think that you were talking about mine. But that said, I around the same time I was learning it, I was working on um, some what is it? Isang Yun um, works with a Korean student of mine, and so I also like Carol. I love folk music. I love traditional music. I'm very familiar with a lot of music from around the world, and in the case of my Korean student, um, um, I recommended that she really actually study music in her own culture. There's a type of songs called pansori, pansori, that are just really to the ear. If you don't know the language, it's just like emotion, just right out there. And I was just thinking that if you really tap into something that's so sincere and so personal to you and your history, anyone with open ears and open eyes and open heart should be able to find their own connection to it and familiarity with it. And that's why in a way there was nothing I was when what I found what I got out of your music was nothing similar, nothing different. It was just exactly what it's supposed to be, and it felt, selfishly speaking, at least in my hands, it felt like mine. And I look forward to hearing other performers claim it as their own as well.
I think, well, first of all, thank you very much. I think of the performer first. When I think about how my music's going to land in the world, I think of the performers first, and I think of the audience second, and then I think of other, in waves. And one of the things that has been so distressing about the last few years, what's been going on, not just in the US, but around the world, is the divisions that we are drawing around ourselves, every which way, every which way. And I think, culture is supposed to be a portal. It's supposed to be something you go through, and it's not supposed to be a wall or border. It's supposed to be an invitation for you to go through to somebody who manifests differently, and you find that you're more common than you could have even intellectually guessed at, even if you were open to that. But then it'd be hit with it. So when I listen to, I'm like you, when I listen to folk music from around the world, I feel like, boy, they were Latino in a previous life. Or I listen to Latin American music and I feel like, well, they were Balkan in a previous life. There's something so visceral about music of the people, I guess you could say, or music that grew itself into existence over time. And that is just part of our collective unconscious. It really is. So then when with artifice, a composer comes along and said, I'm very moved by that, I'm going to fashion something in my vision, you don't want to lose that. And we do sometimes lose that. We're so focused on technical skill sets, and we forget that we're ultimately storytellers across the borders, that culture is a portal. The first time I really felt this for myself was in a conservatory, and I was trying to master the Appassionata Sonata. And I was kind of getting there, and I wasn't with it that long. And my teacher said, let's take a break and get away from this German stuff. And I'm going to give you Bartók's Sonata for piano. And it like leapt into my fingers. And that's a hard piece of music. It leapt into my fingers. I had it memorized in about a week. And it just was my jam. It really spoke to me. And I realized that the ethos of Bartok, learning this music, ingesting it, and then not imitating it, but producing something new for having gone through the blender of his imagination, was the most worthy tribute that he could make to peasant music. He wasn't keeping it in a museum. He was fashioning its roots in today's time. And that to have that kind of model from so young, I realized that no culture was exempt from that kind of immediacy to any citizen of this planet. And I think that has been a guiding light for me. So I don't want my music to be only played by Latinos. I mean, to me, that means I failed, that I created some sort of secret handshake club, and that you have to know such and such percussion instruments. And I want to leave that wiggle room for your imagination and for ownership. And so your words mean a lot to me. Thank you for that.
You have got multiple roots. It's not just your little country of Peru that is a part of your soul. You have European roots too.
You know, my father, some years ago, when he saw me really going after my Latin American heritage with gusto, it was the one part that I was really parsing out. You know, he's of Jewish ancestry, Eastern European ancestry, 99%. And we had results from Ancestry.com a few months ago, and he gave me a Christmas card for Christmas as a Jewish man about 10, 15 years ago, and a stack of CDs that were various types of Jewish music. And the Christmas card was very simple. I opened it up and it said, "Dear Gabriella, because I have to compete, love, Dad." And it was a joke because he had seen, you know, that I hadn't necessarily explored that. And I think that's because first of all, I was in contact much more with my Jewish side of the family here in the US. And the mystery of my mother's ancestry really posed itself to me. The story she told me of this outlandish land that she was talking about growing up brought me into an imaginative mindset. When I heard Spanish, it was amazing to me that I got to claim this in my blood, in my DNA. First time I traveled in Peru, nobody looked at me. I blended right in. I was the right height. I was the right body type, everything. And I never had that experience before. So I think, and also here in the States, people look at me and I present Latina. So there's a certain kind of comportment that comes out. And composers are witnesses. We're storytellers. We witness things that are happening and we put it into our music and we give it to other people who vibe with it and witness it more with their interpretations. So I think I had no choice to gravitate towards my mother's ancestry. And I, a couple of times I've explored the Jewish ancestry, but it was a bit more of an intellectual endeavor. Worthy, but exploring the other side is what really moves me the most.
Carol, you had something you wanted to say.
Thank you so much, Gabriella and Demarre. Beautiful. I love what I would like to think of as your handshake with the European tradition. There was a point in the 5 improvisations that I felt it was the piano interlude, and it was almost a Pierrot Schoenbergian moment. Was I close? Okay. So I heard a lot of that handshake in the piece you wrote for Demarre. And I, like Joan Tower, she used to always say, you know, who grew up in Bolivia, you know, and she was always this blend, this handshake with your traditional European, you know, roots of learning. And I just wondered if you could speak about when you were at Shepherd School at Rice and what that was. I mean, you did mention the Bartok, yes. But am I picking up a little bit of that in these 2 works?
You know, I cut my teeth on Clementi and Haydn and Bach and Beethoven as a budding pianist in my girlhood. And like a lot of composers that are multicultural, we didn't make divisions between Bach and Nicomedes Santa Cruz, who's a major Black Peruvian composer and ethnomusicologist. That came later when I realized that lines were being drawn around this, and I learned to be mindful of it, for better or for worse. So I was so new to composing when I was at Shepherd School. I could barely read or write music, to be honest, because I have a really good ear and perfect pitch. So my piano teacher would play me something and I would start to pick up on it. And then when I got to Shepherd School and everybody's so good, and I wanted to learn music that was harder than what I could pick up, I was sweating bullets. And I really went and studied the forms, and I am multicultural. I'm a multicultural Latina. And I think that can be hard for people to grasp. Like when we elected Barack Obama, very few people pointed out that, you know, he was the son of an immigrant. And this is what a Black man looks like. We have one view of a Black man. We're doing the same thing with Kamala Harris. We do the same thing with artists. And I'm a Peruvian American. And sometimes people will say, well, you know, she's doing this in her music where she's imitating panpipes. And I had a hard time with that word imitating. It's like saying I'm an American imitating a Peruvian. I'm not imitating a Peruvian, I'm a Peruvian American. That is a complete identity. The music also is Peruvian American in that way. So it's a wonderful question you're asking about, you know, the classical form. I love sonata form. To me, it's so organic. You get an idea, something contrasts, you play around with it, then we all come back to it, and then we have an exciting coda. That's just, I know it sounds really fancy when you say sonata form, but it's so organic. That's like telling a joke, right? You set up the parameters, you go into a wild, outlandish story, you have the punchline, and you laugh. That's the coda. It's just how we're hardwired. So composers, we need to tap into that. We need to tap into these canons, whether they're Western or non-Western. And it's our job to achieve this fluency, I would say, an assimilation that is really fluid so that the performer can do their job. If they're struggling with our music, maybe it's ham-fisted when the composer's trying to sound Mexicano and he brings in, I don't know, mariachi influences and it just sounds like a tourist vision of Mexican music, then the performers have to really struggle to own it, to feel it, to sell it. So it takes time. I was clumsy when I was at Shepherd, and there was enough for several years for me just to get a handle on Handel, on Bach, on Beethoven. I didn't start bringing in this music that with a firsthand love for me until I was later in my studies at Michigan was the first time. And it took a long time before I had the wherewithal to understand what I was after, not just feel that I was after something.
Demarre, have you had an opportunity to teach Gabriella's piece yet to any of your students?
I haven't yet, but knowing my studio in Cincinnati, I definitely have a handful of students who would love to play this. I think it's a really curious time for a lot of people. At least I've observed that. I think it's a good time to be a composer, I believe, because at least from the students that I'm surrounded by, a lot of them are really curious. A lot of them want to actually play something that they can really find a connection to for the reasons that I mentioned earlier. If they can recognize something of themselves in the music that they play. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's going to happen.
It's going to be exciting. Yeah. Do we have any questions from our audience members? Oh, Carol, you want to say something first?
Well, I do want to bring up what Shermer has put out, because Kathy Borst-Jones is here with us today. Thank you, Kathy. And they want to know about the availability of the two works. So I personally, this is just a quick one. There are a couple things I might edit to help with the flute part before maybe the